We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction.
On January 28, 1986, just 73 seconds after liftoff, the Space Shuttle Challenger vanished into a massive fireball before the eyes of millions. For decades, a kind of anesthetic was injected into public consciousness. The explosion was said to be instantaneous. The astronauts were believed to have died immediately, without pain, yet technical evidence recovered from the wreckage. Manually activated personal oxygen packs and cockpit switches found in altered positions tell a very different story. It is a story NASA never truly wanted the world to hear. A story of awareness, desperate effort, and a long free fall suspended between heaven and hell. The illusion of an explosion. In the memory of millions of Americans glued to their television screens that morning, Challenger exploded. It is a powerful visual imprint, a fireball blooming in the sky, two solid rocket boosters tearing away in opposite directions like vast white scars, and debris cascading down from nearly 15 kilometers above Earth. The word explosion became the only label repeated across every news broadcast. Yet, when examined through the lens of physics and structural dynamics, that word is fundamentally misleading in describing what truly happened to the crew compartment. To understand the fate of the astronauts, the first step is to strip away the illusion of an explosion. Challenger was not destroyed by a detonation in the classical sense, meaning a supersonic shock wave that obliterates everything in its path. What occurred instead was a structural breakup, a breach in the massive liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen tank, caused by a flame jet from the right solid rocket booster, triggered the release of immense stored energy. At a speed approaching Mach 1.92, aerodynamic forces tore the vehicle apart at its most unstable moment. In that instant of chaos, the crew cabin, the strongest and most heavily reinforced section of the shuttle, revealed a crucial engineering reality. It did not disintegrate. Built from thick reinforced aluminum and designed to withstand the extreme pressures of spaceflight, the cabin was violently ejected from the fireball in a state that was largely intact, while the wings, payload bay, and main engines were shredded by aerodynamic stress. The compartment containing 7 human beings remained a single unified structure. Slow-motion footage from NASA tracking cameras shows the crew cabin emerging from the cloud of fire and continuing upward under its own momentum. Public perception remained frozen on the image of the fireball, yet physical reality had already begun a separate timeline for those inside. This divergence between the fate of the vehicle and the fate of the people it carried is the first critical detail that vanished from public understanding. As the hydrogen cloud dissipated over the Florida sky, the cabin did not immediately fall. It continued along a high arcing trajectory, climbing even higher, carrying with it people the world believed had died at the 73rd second inside the cabin. The environment became a terrifying unknown. Did the astronauts lose consciousness instantly due to extreme gravitational forces or sudden depressurization? Later structural analysis indicates that the cabin did not rupture at the moment of separation. This suggests that for several seconds after breaking away, internal air pressure could still be maintained. An unsettling silence would have settled over the cockpit as electrical systems were severed from the shuttle's main power supply. Yet the figures inside were not motionless. They had begun a journey that no training manual had ever prepared them for. The ghosts in the cockpit. The truth of the 165 seconds of free fall emerged most clearly from what was recovered weeks later from the ocean floor. Amid twisted aluminum and tangled wiring from the wrecked cabin, Navy divers retrieved evidence that stunned NASA leadership: personal emergency oxygen packs, formerly known as personal egress air packs. These were not part of the shuttle's primary life support systems. They were backup breathing devices intended for ground emergencies or smoke inside the cabin. 4 of these oxygen packs had been activated. More importantly, they were not designed to turn on automatically. To deliver oxygen, a person had to perform a deliberate manual action, pulling a ring or flipping a mechanical switch. The pack belonging to Commander Dick Scobie was not activated, but those of pilot Michael Smith and 2 other crew members were. This detail is not merely technical. It is a declaration of consciousness. The activation of these oxygen packs proves that at least some members of the crew survived the initial breakup. They were not only alive, they were alert enough to recognize what was happening and attempt emergency procedures. Michael Smith, seated in the pilot's position, either activated his own pack or had help from a colleague. In the violent conditions of a cabin tumbling away from a fireball at extreme speed, locating and operating such a small device would have required focus and awareness. This evidence dismantles the comforting assumption of an instant and painless death caused by sudden loss of pressure. Even with severe damage, a total depressurization at the 73rd second would have rendered the crew unconscious within 6 to 15 seconds, leaving no time for complex manual actions under fluctuating gravitational forces. The presence of oxygen flowing into the masks means they were breathing, observing, and processing the changing environment around them, inside the confined cockpit during the descent. These figures were not passive. The shriek of wind forcing its way through distorted seams, the groan of metal under mounting air pressure, and the sight of sky and clouds spinning violently past the windows formed their immediate reality. They existed in a suspended state, utterly separated from the stunned world below. The oxygen packs gave them the ability to breathe, but they also extended the time in which they were forced to witness their own unfolding catastrophe. These moments were not an instant fade to black. They were a prolonged existence, where the will to survive collided with a physical reality that could not be reversed. The pivot point and the trajectory of helplessness. After separating from the shuttle at an altitude of roughly 48,000 feet, about 14.6 kilometers, the crew cabin did not fall immediately. Carrying immense upward velocity, it continued climbing along a high arcing path, reaching a peak near 65,000 feet, close to 20 kilometers, at the edge of the stratosphere. This moment marked the true pivot point of the entire tragedy. At the apex of that arc, there was a brief instant of absolute stillness, when upward motion vanished and gravity quietly began pulling the cabin back toward Earth. Dynamic analysis shows that gravitational forces during this sequence ranged from very low to moderate levels, contrary to the widespread belief that the astronauts were crushed by extreme inertial forces when the shuttle broke apart. The actual load on the cabin at separation reached roughly 12 to 20 G for only a fraction of a second. It then dropped rapidly to below 4 G as the cabin entered free fall. For astronauts trained to tolerate high gravitational stress, these forces were not sufficient to cause death or prolonged loss of consciousness. As the cabin began its free fall from an altitude of 20 kilometers, it entered a descent lasting nearly 3 minutes. This was not a simple vertical drop, shaped by uneven mass distribution and a form never meant to fly alone. The cabin began to tumble. Imagine 7 people trapped inside a metal shell spinning through the open sky. Through the windows, they would have seen only streaks of blue and white as sky and cloud whipped past at dizzying speed. Gravity was no longer an abstract physical concept. It had become a form of confinement. The absolute helplessness lay in one brutal fact. The Challenger crew cabin had no backup parachute system. It was designed to remain attached to a winged spacecraft that could glide like an aircraft. Once the wings and engines were gone, the cabin became nothing more than a massive aluminum projectile. The astronauts understood this. During those 165 seconds, they were not waiting for rescue. They were experiencing what science describes as a long descent. With every passing second, the atmosphere grew denser as the cabin dropped lower. The sound of air rushing past intensified, shifting from a whisper to a violent roar as speed exceeded 320 kilometers per hour. Consciousness under these conditions was a form of terror. There is no evidence that the crew lost awareness due to lack of oxygen, since decreasing altitude increased ambient air pressure and the emergency oxygen packs remained active. They were plunging toward the ocean with full awareness of their speed and the time remaining. This trajectory was no longer a space disaster. It had become an extreme psychological experience of confronting death as it closed in meter by meter. Forensic analysis of consciousness. If the emergency oxygen packs served as proof of life, the control panels recovered from the wreckage served as proof of action. During the meticulous examination of the cabin remains, investigators uncovered a disturbing detail on the electrical panel beside the pilot's seat. Occupied by Michael Smith, several circuit breakers had been moved from their original positions. These breakers supplied power to the flight control systems and display screens. It is critical to understand the significance of this discovery. These breakers were located behind the control panel and protected by safety covers designed to prevent accidental activation during vibration or impact. Changing their position required deliberate human effort. Michael Smith was a seasoned Navy pilot, and a pilot's instinct in an emergency is to restore power and regain control. The altered breaker positions indicate that Smith fought against helplessness until the final moments. Forensic assessments led by Dr. Joseph Kerwin, an astronaut and physician, found no evidence of catastrophic injury during the descent itself. The changes observed on the control panel stand as direct evidence of awareness and intent. Yet NASA exercised extreme caution in releasing these findings in official reports. The agency relied on vague language, stating that the cause of death could not be determined with certainty. NASA's silence regarding the question of consciousness was not an absence of information. It was a calculated communication strategy. Had the public learned that the astronauts remained alive and attempted to control a cabin that could no longer fly for nearly 3 minutes, the psychological shock would have been far greater. The tragedy would have shifted from a fatal technical failure to a prolonged ordeal. The truth surrounding Michael Smith's actions was relegated to an obscure corner of archival records, overshadowed by debates over the O-ring. By examining this forensic evidence, a portrait of resilience in the face of inevitability emerges. These individuals were not passively waiting for death. They attempted to interact with a system that was effectively lifeless. The gap between what NASA declared, a sudden malfunction with a swift end, and what the control panels reveal, human effort during a long fall, conceals the deepest fear surrounding space exploration. It is the fear of technology failing those who place their lives in its hands. The crew followed procedure in a situation where no procedure could save them. Major malfunction and the art of language. Moments after Challenger vanished from the sky, the voice of NASA Public Affairs Officer Steve Nesbitt echoed across live television. Flight controllers here are looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction. Pete, the phrase major malfunction would later become part of history. Yet it also marked the beginning of a carefully constructed use of language designed to shape the perception of an entire nation. Why did NASA choose to focus immediately on the word explosion and on dry technical failures? By directing public attention toward the O-ring, hot gas leakage, and contractor errors at Morton Thiokol, the agency reframed the tragedy as a technical problem to be solved. When viewers were absorbed by discussions of temperature thresholds and pressure values, they were far less likely to imagine what unfolded inside the crew cabin during those 165 seconds. This was concealment through disclosure, revealing layers of engineering detail to obscure a devastating human reality. Throughout the press briefings that followed, NASA officials consistently emphasized that the event occurred at great altitude and that everything ended very quickly. This language served two purposes. It preserved public confidence in the space program by presenting the disaster as unavoidable and painless, while also protecting the image of the astronauts as heroes lost in a single instant of glory. Acknowledging a conscious interval of 2 minutes and 45 seconds would have meant admitting that the astronauts were placed into a situation with no escape once a failure occurred during launch. The tension between technical truth and national psychological stability was most visible in how information about the remains was handled. Detailed reports describing the condition of the recovered cabin were classified for an extended period. NASA understood that the reality of the long free fall could cause the public to turn away from space exploration entirely. Who would willingly fly into space knowing that a malfunction could mean 3 minutes of full awareness, while death approached with nothing that could be done to stop it? This battle of language succeeded in creating a safe distance in public understanding. For most people, the memory of Challenger remains fixed on the image of a Y-shaped cloud against a blue sky. Those 165 seconds were erased from the official timeline of collective grief and reduced to a technical detail buried in forensic reports few would ever read. This is how institutions protect themselves from truths that threaten their legitimacy. We were offered a gentle falsehood so that we could continue dreaming of the stars, rather than confront the unforgiving reality of gravity, the collision of two realities. When the Challenger crew cabin finally struck the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, it was not a gentle splashdown. It impacted the water at roughly 333 kilometers per hour, more than 200 miles per hour. At that speed, the ocean behaves like solid concrete. The estimated impact force exceeded 200 G, far beyond the tolerance of any biological or mechanical structure. At this moment, and only at this moment, the two timelines truly converged. Public perception believed the story had ended long before. For the crew, the struggle ended here. The recovery of the cabin weeks later opened a painful forensic chapter. Divers described a scene that was impossible to forget. The cabin had been crushed flat like an aluminum can underfoot, with remains fragmented and interwoven with twisted metal. This is why NASA and the United States Navy maintained complete silence regarding images from the site. Identification of the remains was not merely a medical procedure. It was the final effort to close a journey the world had chosen not to see. This collision of realities also exists in memory and meaning. While the world commemorates the astronauts at the 73rd second, families and investigators carry the weight of 165 seconds. There is a profound difference between losing a loved one in an instant and knowing that they endured their final 3 minutes in full awareness and extreme fear. After recovery, the cabin was never placed on public display or preserved in a museum. When investigations concluded, all Challenger debris, including the crushed crew compartment, was transported to an abandoned missile silo at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. There, it was sealed permanently in underground concrete vaults, removed from daylight and public curiosity. Burying the wreckage was also a way of burying an uncomfortable truth. NASA sought to close this chapter with a physical finality. Yet the contrast between the fireball in the sky and the mangled metal on the ocean floor remains vivid in the minds of those who seek understanding. It fundamentally alters how we view the cost of exploration. These astronauts did not simply die for science. They endured one of the most isolated and terrifying experiences in human history. Confronting the ocean in silence as the system they trusted failed them. The legacy of 165 seconds. The true legacy of Challenger does not reside in revised O-ring designs or new safety checklists. It lives within those 165 seconds, a permanent testament to human will in the face of death. Understanding this gap in perception is not about provoking pain or fueling conspiracy. It is about honoring the clarity and courage of 7 individuals to their final breath. They were not passive victims of an explosion. They were people who fought against a fate already set in motion. The crew's resilience during those moments of free fall quietly reshaped the culture of space exploration. In the years after Challenger, NASA redesigned escape systems, introduced crew parachutes, and developed procedures that allow crew compartments to separate and land safely during emergencies. Every parachute that deploys on modern spacecraft carries a lesson written during those 165 seconds. The sealed fragments resting in old missile silos may fade from memory, but the question they raise remains. Do we choose a harsh truth or a comforting illusion? Facing the crew's conscious descent is the only way to truly honor them. It transforms them from distant symbols into living human beings. With rapid breaths inside oxygen masks and trembling yet determined hands on control panels, Challenger reminds us that space exploration is not only about triumphs, it is also about honesty when confronting the worst failures imaginable. The truth of 165 seconds does not diminish the mission known as STS-51L. It deepens our respect for those who accepted the risk. They did not fly because space was safe. They flew because it was worth it. Even when the price was a 3-minute journey through silence, watching the ocean rise to meet them. The video does not end with a conclusion, but with reflective silence. If you were there, during those 165 seconds, watching the fireball fade behind you as the ocean rushed closer at 300 kilometers per hour, would you choose the truth or a gentle illusion? That choice is the legacy of Challenger. It is the decision to know and to remember a complete reality, no matter how painful. The names Dick Scobie, Michael Smith, Judith Resnick, Ellison Onizuka, Ronald McNair, Gregory Jarvis, and Krista McAuliffe are forever bound to those 165 seconds. Moments of terror and dignity where human will did not yield to the gravity of fate. Choice is the legacy of Challenger. It is the decision to know and to remember a complete reality, no matter how painful. The names Dick Scobie, Michael Smith, Judith Resnick, Ellison Onizuka, Ronald McNair, Gregory Jarvis, and Krista McAuliffe are forever bound to those 165 seconds. Moments of terror and dignity where human will did not yield to the gravity of fate.